The following interview was broadcast live on IsraelNationalRadio.com.
But at this point in time, let us not be carried away by tenderness. For peace and truth to unite and prevail, Israel must first triumph over her enemies, today led by satanic Iran. Today, Israel is waiting for the moment. She knows that the mullahs of Iran are driven by the memory of the Persian Empire. She knows that a nuclear-armed Iran in control of the Persian Gulf would ensure Iran's hegemony over the Middle East and beyond. Israel also knows that she will be the first target, for if Iran controls Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, 1 billion Muslims will exult in victory, will explode in frenzy and wreak havoc on the world, screaming, Allah Akbar. So Israel will strike first, and this will mark the beginning of a new Middle East, one that hardly anyone imagines. While Iran is being devastated, the Israel Defense Forces will crush Hezbollah, Hamas, Fatah, and Syria. Israel will eliminate the entire terrorist network west of the Jordan River. Countless Arabs will flee from Judea and Samaria, as well as from Gaza, as they did after the Six-Day War. The cruel and cynical peace charade will be over. The mendacity of Lilliputian politicians will be silent. The Lion of Judah will have triumphed. During the aftermath, perhaps 2 decades, Israel will organize the peace in cooperation with Muslim reformers that will be found throughout the Middle East who have been silenced by the mullahs and dictators. The 7 Noahide laws of morality will unite the region. Non-secular constitutional democracies will begin to flourish as outlined in a former paper of mine. The United States will cooperate, but petrodollars will no longer lubricate its diplomacy. And so at last, the ethos of jihad will cease to torment mankind, and the people of the Middle East, with the cooperation of a God-inspired Israel, will gain a new birth of freedom. And with this, let me wish you all a happy new year. Any questions?
Professor Paul Eitelberg, your report is like poetry. That's the only way I can describe it, like poetry. It was absolutely beautiful. I so much enjoyed it, and I know that everyone else in the virtual studio did as well. 1-800-270-4288. Do you agree? Do you think that Israel should leave the UN, or in other words, to hell with the UN, as is the title of this report? Professor, I would say that not only should Israel leave the UN, but the American people, America should leave the UN. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, well, there is a movement in the United States of about tens of millions of Americans who have a slogan, "Get us," meaning U.S., "get us out of the UN." So there is a great number of Americans that are well aware that the UN is a parasitic organization supported by the United Nations, by the United States, and very often voting on issues against the United States. So definitely, there are tens of millions of Americans that would like to leave the United Nations. And certainly Israel has all the more reason to do so. We have nothing to gain and everything to lose by remaining in that organization. We don't need a UN forum because who's listening to us when we're speaking from that forum?
Can I ask you to look out of the box for a moment and just try to imagine a scenario? What if we actually pulled out of the UN? What would happen?
Well, there'll be a great deal of excitement about this. Let's remember that when the PLO was admitted to the United Nations in 1975, Senator Moynihan, actually he had also been ambassador to India, Senator Moynihan said that that this was a strike against Israel and that the anti-Zionist resolution was racism. If Israel was to leave the United Nations, many nations would at least silently applaud us and I think some would openly applaud us, we would certainly win the support of most Americans. That would be my feeling. And I think that by leaving the UN, and of course we have to give the reasons for doing so. We can cite some of the things that I have mentioned and include the point that Israel has been the supporter of the United States, whereas the other nations in the United Nations have opposed the United States. If we would make this very clear, upon resigning from the UN, we would have a tremendous groundswell of Americans applauding us, and that is all Israel needs to take the lead.
It would also be, though, a declaration of war against the international community. So with the American applause, what about the repercussions?
Well, I don't think there will be such a thing as a declaration of war in terms of anything from a military point of view. It would be a declaration of intellectual and moral war against the United Nations. We are condemning the United Nations as a corrupt organization, and we are going to cite the corruption, point out the mischief of the United Nations, its utter impotence, its inability to preserve peace, that its real ambition is to establish a world global government that would lead to the greatest tyranny on earth. Of course, I'm not talking about just resigning and not saying anything. We have to issue reports one after another, and this should be done by the Prime Minister of Israel. That has to be done not just by the Foreign Minister. The Prime Minister of Israel must make it very clear the reasons why we are resigning from the United Nations, and in the process expose the United Nations for its impotence, its corruption, as I have done very, very all too briefly in this morning's report.
Professor Paul Eilberg, from your mouth to God's ears. I agree with you, and I'm sure most of our listeners do as well. Thank you very much for being with us today and for that beautiful report.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.